All right, good morning. Welcome into the Out of Bounds Show. Your SEC Insider Hit this morning is brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. It's good to be blue. The official healthcare provider of the Out of Bounds Show, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Mississippi. Show is also driven by your next GMC Sierra truck, GMC Yukon from Fowler GMC, Pearl Brandon. FowlerGMC.com for your next GMC Sierra truck or Yukon Denali. We welcome in Steve Palazzolo on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. And Steve P., how about them Ole Miss Rebels, Trinidad Chambliss, and that Ole Miss defensive line took care of Kirby Smart in Georgia?
They sure did. What a game last night. The excitement, the great way to cap New Year's Day. But yeah, it was really impressive. With how the first game went too, where I know there was so many missed opportunities, and they handled the onslaught from Georgia every single time. Georgia came back and just until they just kind of ran out of gas at the end. Incredible what they did last night. Chambliss, I think, man, just unreal what he was able to do under pressure, game on the line, every time they needed a big play. Very impressive. And then given all the circumstances, with all the drama for the past month or so, really impressive watching Ole Miss move on.
So Georgia, Ole Miss has better skill people than the Georgia Bulldogs. How about that, Steve? Kirby continues to miss. Well, they've got good players. They continue to miss at the wide receiver position. I mean, they don't have the same guys that Ole Miss has. They don't have Wallace and Stribling level players. How surprising is that to you as someone who's covered the NFL draft for well over a decade?
Well, it's interesting because coming into the year, I wasn't surprised by it because this next month in college football is going to determine a lot of what happens next year because of the transfer portal. And you look at what Ole Miss was able to do with Trey Wallace, with Stribling, like those were two of the better wide receiver transfers last year. And they didn't just get one, they got two, and you combine them with Daquan Wright and you've got some playmakers there. And in what the new age of college football allows you to do is go get players who are established in college football. Now, Georgia had a playmaker problem last year, and then they go get Zachariah Branch, and you see how special he can be. But he was their only guy yesterday. He's their only guy that they can rely on. So what college teams, I think, are struggling with, and you saw this at Clemson. Clemson had so much retention. Like this should have been the best Clemson team that they've had in 6 or 7 years, with their receiver talent, with an experienced quarterback, with defensive line talent, a bunch of first rounders. But for some reason, it just didn't click there. And I think the big schools like the Georgias, the Alabamas of the world are trying to figure out, because you listen to the coach speak. They all say, well, it's all about relationships and it's all about, still got to develop and you still have to recruit and develop. But the teams that are moving on right now, or the teams that were in that final 8, were picking the best players out of the portal, getting them and filling holes and creating playmakers. And the Ole Miss has been as good as any team, whether it was last year on the defensive line, this year with their receiving talent, and of course with Trinidad Chambliss. When you hit on a player like that, even if that wasn't the plan coming into the season, obviously there's a huge impact there.
Yeah.
But the playing field is leveled, is what I'm getting at. You can't just say we're Georgia, we'll get all the best recruits, we'll develop them. Because as soon as those players don't play a little bit, they can transfer, so you don't have the same depth. And if you miss on a kid or two, you have to bring in the impact players from the portal, whether it's from Oklahoma State, from Penn State, whatever it might be. And so Ole Miss has been as good as any team at getting established college talent, bringing them in, adding them to the mix, and creating a powerful team.
Steve Palazzolo, NFL Podcast of the Year, covers the NFL Draft, is all into the portal. You were almost you went after a general manager job, right?
Yeah, I interviewed for Michigan State this offseason as far as the GM goes. I do some consulting. So right now we're in the thick of it, right? Portal just opened today, and I'm consulting with schools and helping them out in their whole team building. So I'm very much in the college mix here.
That's awesome. Do you enjoy that?
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Cause I have predictive scores on every single player in the nation and, trying to help teams figure out where to go, how to deploy their resources. I love it. It's a lot of fun. It's chaotic because of agents and fake prices that these players are commanding and figuring out the market. It is a wild world right now, but it's exciting. There's a lot of opportunity in college, and that's why you see this unique Final Four, right? Seeing Indiana, because Indiana brought all these guys from JMU, and they could play.
Yeah.
And Signetti's unbelievable, but they brought in a lot of transfer talent, and they're putting it all together. So it's really impressive what they've done, what Ole Miss has done. Miami has complemented in the portal properly, and they've developed their defensive line talent. So it's a really interesting world in team building where it's just not as top heavy as it used to be. So I enjoy that whole experience.
Steve Palazzolo talking college football playoffs and portal. He's heavily involved. So are all four teams, as he mentioned: Ole Miss, Miami, Indiana, and Oregon. Steve P. joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. We are the Out of Bounds Show, and we're brought to you by Stella Artois and Wings at Martin's in Livingston. That is a winning combination for the college football playoffs and for the last weekend of the NFL. All right, with the Ole Miss, so I give Miami credit too. They were 9.5-point underdogs, and they dominated in the trenches. And Cristobal has had some real heartbreaking losses the last couple of years, Steve P. They've recruited really well. You mentioned their portal hauls. They're spending money. Were you surprised that they were able to dominate Ohio State in the trenches, Steve?
Maybe the domination a little bit, yeah. But also not really. I thought Reuben Bain, the first month of the season, was the best player in the nation. I thought if you were truly doing Heisman ballots back in September, by mid-October, he should have been number 1 or 2. So that guy could take over a game. Mesidor, same thing. He's a little bit older. So they got dogs up front on the defensive line. We saw that. Ohio State had not been tested a ton, I think, as far as their pass protection goes, and Miami created a little bit of indecision with Julian Sayin, and that's what led to some of those negative plays. So plus Miami, and they're huge up front on the offensive line as well, and that was what maybe surprised me a little bit more. There were some plays that Ohio State just stuffed them on the run, and Caden McDonald's a future first round nose tackle type, but Miami started to get some movement and create some plays in the run game, and I thought they used some creative blocking schemes, and they did a nice job against a very good Ohio State defense. And it's not like Miami dominated offensively. They had the pick six. They only scored 17 points offensively, and they had that late touchdown. But they did just enough to control the ball, control the clock. So absolutely a line of scrimmage type of team. And it's interesting, Ole Miss isn't as strong as they were last year as far as their D-line goes, and but you see the size that they have. I was just talking to somebody yesterday. It's like, man, those Ole Miss defensive linemen are all monsters.
Yeah.
And they were able to hold up against Georgia, and that's a factor. So it's a fun matchup. It's a really, really fun matchup as far as watching the line play on both sides.
Out of the four teams left, Steve Palazzolo on the Out of Bounds Show, his show Check the Mic on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. We're talking Ole Miss winning and Miami and Indiana. What a fascinating story. And Oregon dominated Texas Tech. Out of the four teams left, who do you like to win it?
I like Indiana. I really think, Ole Miss will make a run. I know the radio. I know where we are. But Indiana, I think, has the best all-around team. They have a good enough offensive line. They're feisty on the defensive side of the ball. They have very underrated cornerbacks. I think those guys can play. D'Angelo Pons on the outside looks outstanding. When you watch Indiana's defense throughout the season, every time I go back to the film, I'm like, linebacker 46 making a ton of plays. The safeties active, the corners they're good. So they're physical enough up front, well coached, fundamentally sound, all that. And then offensively, Fernando Mendoza is legit. I mean, he makes big time throws when they need it. Their receivers are outstanding. Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, two other Charlie Becker on the outside. And they got 4 legitimate receivers. And I just think Indiana's a really well-rounded team, and we know how well coached they are and what Cignetti has done there. So I think Indiana, the number 1 team, still undefeated. They look like the real deal. Now, they played a close game. They played a lot of close games. Iowa, Penn State, Oregon. It's going to be another really close game, I think, against Oregon. It'll be a great game. But I think I like Indiana to go wire to wire here.
Oh, wow. Steve Palazzolo picking the Hoosiers to win. And they just – can you imagine what Bama's thinking today? I mean, the Alabama Crimson Tide, most successful program in the history of college football. Can you imagine what they're thinking today, the way that they were dominated by a has-been basketball school that's now turned into a football school, Steve P?
It's a different world, because I know, those who are skeptical of the sport would, if I say, well, there's money involved now, you would say, well, there's always been money involved, right? We know it's been going on.
Sure.
But the money's coming from different places, right? So you've got oil money at SMU and Texas Tech, and Indiana has money and investment, and it just opens the door for different schools. And the teams who theoretically had the money previously, or had the donors, so to speak, it's a different group of donors, and so that's what's going to change the sport. The other part of it is we live in a world, I think, in college football. I've tweeted about this a bunch recently. We're so conditioned as college football fans to have a juggernaut, a powerhouse, an Alabama, a Georgia, Miami during their heyday, Ohio State, whoever it might be, during Florida for like 4 years. This powerhouse that only loses one game every couple of years, USC, right, in the 2000s. And it's harder to do that. It's harder to – it's kind of like when they put the scholarship limit to 85, and it's like, well, you can't just store the best players at 120 scholarships anymore. And so that created some parity. So now there's even more parity, because you can't just stock up on all the great players. Other teams are going to have money. Then you have these clock rules, right? The games are a little bit shorter. That makes it a little bit easier for the underdog to make a play in college football with fewer plays. So there's all these things adding up that I think the sport's going to look different, and you're not going to have as many, undefeated teams, one-loss teams, dynasty type of schools, because it's just harder, I think, to maintain that level of dominance. And I think that's exciting for the sport, but it's different for college football fans, right? Like, you're used to seeing these dominant teams and saying, well, that's Alabama, right? They never lose. And it's just going to be harder to maintain that level of dominance, I think, in the coming years.
I wonder what Bama and Georgia will do after Bama got embarrassed. Georgia got beat. Still, same deal. They're not in the semifinals. You mentioned the portal. I wonder if these powers will start to adjust a little bit more. Do you expect to see that over the next 2 weeks as the portal opens today?
Yeah, they have. I think they have to. I mean, I think this is the weakest Georgia team that they've had. I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that they made it this far, but I think it's the weakest team they've had in a few years. Both offense, especially the defensive line. I would say they've got some players. Don't get me wrong, but it's not like 2 or 3 years ago when the whole group's going in the first 2 rounds. So, yeah, there has to be some adjustments. It's interesting because Georgia and Alabama and the big SEC teams might be pulling from. They might say, well, we only want like the kid from Pittsburgh is transferring, who's like a stud linebacker, Rasheem Biles, and like he's going to go to Ohio State to visit. And it's like, all right, maybe you're only going to pull these other all-conference players, but you can still look to the Group of Five. There's a lot of good players that have come out of Group of Five. We see what Trinidad Chambliss just did coming from Division II. So you almost. It's easy to say, well, we're Georgia. If we're going to take a transfer, it's got to be some all-conference player from the ACC or the Big 12. But they might need to expand. There are legitimate Group of Five players. Now, it's hard for like a JMU as a team to compete with Oregon, but there are players on JMU's roster who are going to make an impact at Power Four schools next year. So I think that's where they need to adjust. Whereas Alabama and Georgia would just say, let's recruit this 4 and 5 star. He sits for 2 years, and then by year 3 he's starting. Well, those players might leave and go start in the Big 12 or somewhere else. So you don't have those guys anymore. So you might have to pull these group of 4 stars that you normally wouldn't pull in. And I think that's one of the adjustments maybe that Georgia, Alabama, and some of those the SEC, big time schools are going to need the adjustments they need to make.
Well, and credit to Ole Miss and these teams that you're talking about who have been able to. They got in front of the portal a couple of years ago, and now it's paying off. You know what's crazy is how many James Madison kids that Cignetti brought in can play at this level, Steve. So that goes. I mean, what does that say about the way they were recruiting when they were at James Madison?
Yeah, I mean, well, part of it's that, and part of it's the development,
right?
But I think those players get overlooked because, like I said, it's tough for a James Madison as a team, with 85 scholarships to compete with an Oregon with 85 scholarships. But if you take the 10 best players from JMU or the 15 best players, it's like, all right, these guys could play at Indiana and then in the Big Ten, and I think that's what we're seeing, right? And it's unfortunate for some of the Group of 5 teams. It's unfortunate because as soon as their players are good, they're gone, right? And as soon as they win Mountain West All Conference or American AAC All Conference, they're gone, and it's harder for you to keep your players, and then they have to do the same thing maybe at the FCS level or whatever it might be. But here's the other challenge I think for teams, and what they're going to do is there's literally like 15 to 20,000 players that need to be evaluated, if not more, because you don't know who the free agents are. Like in the NFL, there's 200 to 300 free agents every year. You know who they are, and they have an NFL resume, so you have a really good idea of who they are. You don't know who's going to be free, so you have to have this massive evaluation process to then sift through thousands and thousands of players to just pull in 15 or 20 or whatever it might be in a given cycle. That's where the advantages are going to be. It's going to be in those scouting departments, in the evaluation process, in the valuation process, because now you have to figure out, I've got this guy for $1 million, this guy for 800,000, who's a better play? And so there's a lot of moving parts. And here's the other thing. I think it's going to be hard, like what Florida State did a couple of years ago. They hit on the portal one year and then missed the next year. There's going to be, it's because it's so dependent on 1 year evaluations, it's going to be harder for teams to maintain success. Like if Indiana just misses on a portal cycle, which is possible, they might fall back to an 8-win team. Like that's all possible. And it's going to be harder for teams to maintain elite success because it's free agency rather than recruit and develop like it used to be.
Steve Palazzolo had the NFL podcast of the year. He's all about the portal, free agency for college. Of course, he's been covering it in the NFL for a long time. He joins us on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We're down to the Final Four. You mentioned evaluating. The general manager and then director of player personnel or AGM, all the same things in the NFL now at the college level. Those are now going to be the hot positions, as you know, Steve. These GMs are going to make $500,000, $750,000, $1 million a year. Florida just hired an NFL guy. I guess you saw that. This thing's not going anywhere. These positions underneath the GM and underneath the GM are going to be highly, highly paid people. Don't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm open to taking one of those $1 million GM jobs once they're available. So I'm open to it. But it is, yeah. And again, a lot of schools are saying, hey, we want an NFL model and we want this and that. And there's elements to that, but it's very different than the NFL. There's similarities, but it's different.
Sure.
The similarities are you need a structure, right? You don't have in college the infrastructure that an NFL team has, where you're talking about a GM, assistant GM, director of college scouting, director of pro scouting, and it just funnels up to the general manager, who's essentially just a high volume decision maker, right? Take all the information, make the best decision. You have a salary cap manager. So I think those are the positions you're going to start to see in college. And I think you need a combination of some NFL-like experience, but also some college experience, because at the end of the day, the portal's open today and you can't just pick your best players. You also have to recruit them, and you got to get them on campus, and you have to sell them, and you have to figure out what to pay them, and you have to deal with agents. And then that's the other dynamic is these agents, there's a plethora of agents and there's no certification process in most states. So you might be dealing with people who are super inexperienced from an agent perspective, telling you, hey, my kid's making it, he's getting offered $1 million by LSU. And it's like, no, he's not.
Right.
So it is a wild time. So yeah, those positions, they're going to be coveted. I think schools are still trying to figure out what those positions look like, what the skill sets are. And I think you're going to learn a lot as those get shaped in the next 4 or 5 years.
Have you ever called an agent's bluff? One of these pseudo not certified we call them third party flesh peddlers, but
I haven't had to, but like even in my baseball days, you ran into some guys where you're just like, this guy really has no clue. Like this guy's telling me that his pitcher is great and that his pitcher was in AAA and he was in rookie ball, and I'm like, I don't even know how you can even call yourself an agent. Like he literally told me that he was in AAA, and I could, like, the internet exists, man. I looked him up. He's in rookie ball. What are you talking about? This guy, he's no good. And so I know there's I've got some friends in the industry. They're honest with me, so I haven't had to yet, but I can only imagine just because there's so many agents out there when it comes to college and agencies, and that's a budding world that people are trying to really take advantage of right now.
All right, we've got a minute. Did I miss anything? Is there anything like 1 minute, 60 seconds we need to hit on? How about this? If you had to pick one quarterback to roll with, would it be Fernando, Trinidad? Which one would you roll with out of the four left?
It's Fernando, but I'm telling you, man, like, I hate using Mahomes comps, but that 10-minute sequence last night where Trinidad's, making these big time plays and he's got this playmaking feel and he's just cool under pressure. It was unbelievable. And I was just picturing NFL evaluators watching just for a 5 to 10 minute sample being like, that's it, man. That dude has it. That is unbelievable. So you could see what Chambliss can do with his arm talent, with his playmaking feel to take over a game. So yeah, I think Fernando Mendoza is a better player right now, but I'm watching Chambliss and I know somebody saying, I know he's a little bit smaller and this and that, but man, I want that dude because he can make plays. And that was very impressive what he did last night.
Yeah, great game by Trinidad Chambliss, and Georgia couldn't get him on the ground. Steve Palazzolo, NFL Podcast of the Year. Thanks, buddy. Have a great weekend.
Yep, thank you. Appreciate it.
Steve P. on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We're brought to you by Total Transportation of Mississippi. They're offering nationwide and regional routes at Total Transportation of Mississippi. Full benefits, weekly pay, time off, powered by Total Transportation of Mississippi. You can apply today. TotalMS.com on the front page. Offering nationwide and regional routes. TotalMS.com. Apply right now with a great company.